There.
And pull this chair up and,
Okay, the livery stable?
of course, grandmother had the hotel
Right.
next door, and the kitchen was in the back, and that's where she would have been working because they served meals. And there was a dray. That's a horse-drawn wagon,
Oh,
and it was to go down to the depot. It was a busy depot at the time. There was a station agent there. But the horse was to go down there in the morning. The train came from the east and brought the Chicago Tribune, which my folks got. And in the afternoon, as I remember, it must have been 4:30. It came from the west, headed east. And so the horse was supposed to take the wagon and go down to meet the train. But the man who drove it wasn't as reliable. You've met people like that. And sometimes grandmother would look out the window and the horse would be going all by itself. It knew that it was time to go. And
so they brought the Chicago Tribune
They
on the
brought-
train?
all the mail came by train.
Oh, okay.
There was no other mail or packages that came. People and mail. The train didn't always stop. There was a pole with a hook on it, and the man on the train could reach out and put the mail bag on that hook, so the train didn't necessarily stop. So
Oh, so you just kind of,
You had to be good.
yeah, you did. You had to be fast.
yeah.
On the ball.
Well, the trains didn't go as fast as they do now,
True.
But they managed to get it on the hook, and like I said, my family took the Chicago Tribune, and that came on that morning train. I'm assuming the Des Moines Register or the Cedar Rapids Gazette came on the afternoon train, I would guess.
From the west. They
About
came from
what
both
year
sides.
would that have been,
Yeah.
Virginia? About what year would that have been?
Well, it started a long time ago. It would have been, if I was born 19, in the early 1930s. I remember it, but
Okay.
it would have started long before
Long before
that.
Okay.
See, they weren't bringing it by horse and buggy. It came by train all those years. So,
I think it's interesting about the people who came through on train and stayed
were-
at the hotel.
there were salesmen who came through on the train, and grandmother would know. Some of them came through regularly, maybe every 2 weeks or once a month. And there were some who came
It's okay. We're,
regularly and always stayed at the hotel.
yeah, you're like a silhouette on this. That's what we're gonna have to change where we're at here.
That's fine.
And,
Let's try here.
Good right there? Okay, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
I remember there was a man named Mr. Lolix, and he lived at Lyons, which is down by Clinton.
Yeah.
And he always wanted to be sure he got room number 6 at the hotel. And grandmother knew that he'd be coming once every 2 weeks or so. And he was a salesman, a district salesman, but he sold candy. And sometimes he'd slip me a little candy that he had to give away. So, but it really was a very busy hotel. And as to how many rooms were in it, I have the key for room number 17, but Barbara and I never figured out where room number 17 was.
Oh.
That must be why we still have the key, because there really wasn't a room number 17.
Did any famous people ever stay there?
Bob Hope stayed there one
We
night.
had a rumor that he stayed there.
really?
We had a rumor that he had stayed there, and we
Yes,
wondered
he
if it
did,
was
and he
true.
told about it on the Arthur Godfrey show one morning, and I was so glad I happened to have it on that morning. He had been performing at a theater in Cedar Rapids the Rialto. I'm not sure of the name of the theater, but he'd been performing there, and he had his very first car, and he headed back to Chicago. And he had trouble with his car, and he had to stay there for 2 nights while the car was repaired.
I think I heard that story.
Uh-huh.
Yep.
And then some man wrote a book. Alice is traveling with Alice, or something like that. And she wrote a book about driving across. She was the first woman to drive a car from the East Coast to the West Coast. And she got to Mechanicsville, and they had the top. You've seen pictures of the old cars, you could put the top back. And she had 3 other women with her, and the top was back, and they got to Mechanicsville, and it was pouring rain. So they drove, the big doors were open to the livery stable, so they just drove right in. And they went to they left the car there, and they went to the restaurant, Butler's Cafe.
And where was that at?
Spent some time there, and there were some older men just sitting back there drinking coffee or whatever, and they wanted some music, so Alice went to the piano and played for them for a while, and then the rain hadn't let up, so they spent the night at the hotel. And Bill found it in one of the registers where they had spent the night.
Oh, neat. So you have all the registers of everybody who stayed? Or you did?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Well, my sister has one, but we have the others. They're merely one leaning up against that
2.
bookshelf.
Oh, isn't that something?
Oh, wow. That is
Look
cool.
at, grandfather wrote the date at the top of each page, and look at that beautiful handwriting.
Yeah.
Oh, didn't they have beautiful handwriting back then?
My.
My dad had,
Oh, Barb, we can't.
yes, the little Palmer method.
That is-
Yes.
yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to read, but
Yeah, I know Dad had beautiful handwriting.
there
I'm
would
sure
be,
these are marked for a reason. But
I know it's been marked where there would be a theater group come.
And now the kids can't even write.
Yeah, I know. You know, that's one thing that we said for our kids. We want them to learn how to write and read cursive, because otherwise they're not going to be able to read anything.
No.
From
Yeah,
his,
they
from
won't be
any
able to
historical
read.
perspective.
They
Yeah.
said that the kids in years to come won't be able to read our Constitution or
Right,
Declaration
nothing.
of Independence
Nothing.
because they can't read cursive.
Right.
No, they
the
can't.
Schuler Vaudeville Company,
Oh.
Opera House, Matinee and Night, and these were,
So this is our opera house.
no,
No.
they were traveling through,
Oh, okay.
and they were probably performing
Oh,
Okay.
there.
Yeah, there'd be traveling theater groups that
Yeah.
would stop.
There are pages where they would come back down in the evening and draw maybe a scene from the play or whatever they were doing.
Oh, that's neat. And I love this. Are these like little drops of ink?
Yep.
Or oh, I love that. That is so cool.
So,
Did you see that? It's pretty neat. That
that
is.
is so
It was
neat.
interesting.
It's
It
just
was
so
fun to
neat.
see and
Yeah.
to see the
Love
writing.
Yeah.
Just so neat.
World
And it's been
players.
so well kept. That's
Oh,
so great.
amazing.
mhm.
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yeah, I don't know if I'll be able to read it.
You
Yeah,
will.
it's just so neat.
I look at old
So neat.
records and I can never read the writing because it's usually too
And
faint.
the play would be performed at the old Opera House. That's up above, well, Dan's Tires has
Yeah.
it now,
Yeah.
across the street from the.
Huh. To the most flattering opinions of the press. Yeah,
That
So
is
what year?
fun.
1895.
this
Yeah.
is 95, 96, but we have older ones. What year was the hotel built, Mom?
1890.
1890? Okay.
Yeah.
My grandfather had come from the South because his first wife had a sister who lives here. And grandfather had been a pilot on a steamboat. And after the Civil War, there were more modern boats coming in, and there weren't the calls for a steamboat pilot. So his first wife had a sister, a Mrs. Hines, and I found on an old plat book where they owned land north and east of town, and grandfather's first wife bought land north and east of town. And so they came here, and he had a bank here along with another man. And, oh, you don't remember the old Pink Hotel, do you? It's where the Veterans
Oh, yeah.
Park
Yeah.
is now down there.
You remember?
I
where
don't
that was?
remember. I
Okay.
don't, but I don't know if you probably
yeah,
do.
I remember it.
It was
Okay.
an awful old building they took down and where the Veterans Park is.
Yep.
And they really wanted a better hotel. And this was in 1890, and it stood there until they
Oh,
built
geez.
that
Oh,
park.
yes, yeah. Oh, it was an awful
Uh,
thing.
And so grandfather, his first wife had died, and their adopted daughter had died. And he, of course, he was from the South. He had no family left, and he said, okay, he would do it. So he borrowed the money, but then he died. He married grandmother. After the hotel was built, he married grandmother, and after he died, she continued. She had always helped in the kitchen and helped serving meals and been the cook, and she continued to take care of it. And they served meals until, I think it must have been 1916, along about
Wow.
there, that they quit serving meals. And the picture, Mary Lee's going to bring you, show you.
Okay. Oh, that is great. No,
Oh, meals served.
that is great. Oh. Let me give it a turn around again.
Meals
I
served
like
and
the no meals served, that's what
Yeah,
hangs
that's
in
what
my
I like,
kitchen.
yeah, that's what I like, no meals served.
I still want my phone's reflection. in it.
Yeah, but I think Grandfather Page and your grandmother had a wonderful love story.
Well, the Judd family was probably the most prominent family in town. And they built one of the big houses down at the east end on the north side of the street. And Mrs. Judd was just slightly crippled, just had a little trouble, like I am, I guess, only maybe worse. And grandmother was only
11.
11
Oh,
years
wow.
old, and the family had no money, none, and so she had to go to work. They all went to work when they reached 11, and so she worked for the Judds, and Mr. Judd knew he was going to die, and his wife was slightly crippled, and he asked grandmother, or said, if she would promise to stay with Amelia as long as she lived, he would leave grandmother $4,000. And in 1885, that was a fortune. That was a lot of money. So grandmother did stay with her. And when Mrs. Judd died, grandmother had 2 brothers in Brooklyn, New York, and they wrote and asked grandmother to come there and live with them. There's no future for you in Iowa, in a little town in Iowa. Come here, this is where things are happening. So grandmother went there, and her grandfather Page called and asked her to come back and marry him. He was a lot older than grandmother,
Huh.
a lot older.
But the way I had heard it is that he wrote, and of course they never would have dated or anything, but said, I miss you, will you come back and marry me?
Huh.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And it
Yeah.
did,
So they knew each other
They did.
before.
yeah.
Because she had worked at the hotel then
Oh, right.
after Mrs.
Yeah.
Judd died.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or had gone to
That
stay
they
at the
took
hotel.
Mrs. Judd, they didn't want to heat that great big house over the winter. So they got a room at the hotel, a downstairs room for Mrs. Judd, and grandmother stayed in this room at the hotel over winter rather than heat a great big house, because grandmother would have had to use coal and burn wood, I suppose.
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, come spring, Mrs. Judd wanted to go home, so grandmother went down, and it took her 3 or 4 days to clean up the house and get it heated and ready for Mrs. Judd to go home. But they did, and then Mrs. Judd died very shortly after that, and grandmother got the money and went to. Then grandmother wanted to buy farmland, but a woman couldn't buy farmland in her name very often back then. So it was after she married grandfather Page, he could buy the farmland with the understanding that it was grandmother's.
Okay.
But she couldn't buy a farm.
Huh.
At least not easily, so
Right,
that's
yeah.
how they worked it out.
Yep.
And it was 3 miles north of town, and you didn't live here back then, but I bet Marlon was one of them who, I'd go out the farm with grandmother in the morning, and I could play all up and down the creek and where the old dam went out. I could
Yep.
play there, and I can play on the foundation of the old mill,
Yeah.
and it was mine. In the afternoon, I had to stay up at the house with grandmother, and it was years later I found out grandmother knew the boys were skinny dipping
Yep.
out there. There was a hole out there that was deeper, and Marlon might have been
He
one of them.
probably was.
I bet he was.
They used to ride their bikes out there.
Glover, James Glover,
Yep,
told about,
yep,
and others too told me about going
Yep.
out there, and the boys were skinny dipping.
yep.
So where is that at? Where's the
Hmm?
where was the farm at?
It's about 3 miles north of town.
Okay.
Gorman Robinson's house is
Yeah.
on the hill.
Okay.
Colleen and Chuck have their
Oh.
place out there, and you go down the hill then.
Okay. All right.
It was back in the field, back off the
Yeah.
road.
Right.
I'd love to have a house back out
Oh.
in there.
There used to, I loved that house. You could go in on the main floor, go up the steps and walk out on the porch, and it was built into the hill.
Yeah,
It was one step to go into the cellar. It was one step down and not deep.
yeah. I always thought that'd be a beautiful place
Yeah.
That's here.
to have a house out there.
Here's the mill.
Oh, yeah, there's,
And I have a fireplace in my backyard.
Mm-hmm.
The fireplace in my backyard is built with stone from the foundation of the mill.
Oh wow.
And that the millstones that we have in the backyard came from France.
Really?
The millstones, uh-huh.
I thought that was fascinating. I would have
yeah,
assumed
I
the
wouldn't have-
millstones came from a quarry around here.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we've
Yeah.
got
But
Stone
because,
City, you would think,
but because the type of stone needed,
They're in sections.
huh,
And Brian Walshire made a new band for me to hold them together. They were
Yeah.
falling apart because they're in sections around,
Ah.
but they tell me they were imported from France.
Wow.
I wouldn't have even given a thought to
I
something
wouldn't
like
have
that.
either.
Over 94 years, I've collected some information.
Yes, yeah. When
But
you
that
talk to
was-
people, you
The house, mill house doesn't look very good either here.
and we can take these out. and you can
Grandmother
knock them or
modernized
whatever.
it a lot.
Okay. That's
It was
good.
still pretty crude. There was still 3 bedrooms and a bath. There was an outside toilet.
Right.
There was,
oh, yes,
Oh, was it 3-seater?
yeah,
Wow, that is
Oh,
fancy.
no, she said three, you said 3 bedrooms.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, we're
bedroom.
three
And then where we
bedrooms.
quote
Oh, okay,
now,
okay.
how many baths, she said
Oh.
8 baths.
Oh, okay,
Half
gotcha,
of the
gotcha.
outside,
Okay. 3 bedrooms and a path.
yeah.
Gotcha. Path to
Okay.
the bathroom.
Yeah,
but I loved it out there. There was a hill down to the creek, and I get bloodsuckers, but Uncle Myron would pick them off.
oh,
I didn't mind I was a little girl. I didn't mind bloodsuckers. You know what bloodsuckers are?
Yeah, I've had them on me before.
Yeah.
Okay. Marley and Barb might not know.
Oh, yes,
I
yes. Yeah, I've done enough wading in ponds and creeks. Yep.
But anyway, it was fun. Uncle Marion had a Model T car, and he'd come in and get grandmother to come out and clean. I'd get to ride along. And that's when I played out there.
Oh, okay.
And when I had to stay at the house in the afternoon. But there was a swing, and
Mm-hmm.
so I could play.
So going back to the hotel, you had talked about on the train, the salesman would come every so often,
Yeah,
and they would
would
have their
have,
sample cases.
they had certain days, Mr. Lalick had certain days he'd come and he wanted grandmother to save room number 6 for him every, I don't know, third and fifth, or second and fourth day of the month he would be there, and he wanted grandmother to save room number 6 for him. And there were others too that, and the bank, well, it used to be up in the corner, now it's Jack Kingley's, but Jack Carville was the cashier at the bank, and he came right from World War I. Grandmother said he was wearing his uniform when he got there. And he stayed there from what would have been 1918 till he was married in 1940. He stayed there
At the hotel?
at the hotel.
Gee.
So there were a lot
Wow.
of people who stayed there for quite a while. Well, I went to college in Virginia for 2 years, and Mother and Dad said it would be an experience for me to fly home. This would have been in 1947. And they thought it'd be, and you couldn't fly into Cedar Rapids, you could fly from Washington, D.C. to Chicago. But I needed $50 for a plane ticket from Washington to Chicago. And you could go to the treasurer's office there at the college, and I asked for the money, and they said, oh, we never let girls have more than $5 or $10. And I said, but I need it to buy my plane ticket. Well, I'm sorry, we only let girls have $5 or $10, usually just $5. And I said, well, can you call the Mechanicsville Bank? And of course, Jack was the one who answered, and he lived there with us at the hotel. So he said, oh, yes, give her that. Give her an extra 10. I don't want her to run short. So I got my money to fly home by having had him live with us. So it was fun. Oh, and calling on the telephone. The telephone, of course, it was the old-fashioned telephone operator where you'd call, and I might call and say I wanted to talk to, well, they'd pull up a little brass tip in the cord, and they'd see my phone was ringing, and they'd pull that in the spot, and I wanted to talk to Barb, and her cord and would pull up, and so we could talk. And that one time I wanted to call home, and Ella Fayon was the telephone operator that night, and I wanted the number 3 on 86, 3 and the number O-N, the word O-N. Because Dad was a veterinarian. If you wanted to talk to Dad, you had a 6 animal, you asked for 2 on 86. If you wanted to talk to Mother, you asked for 3 on 86. Well, the telephone operator in Fredericksburg, Virginia couldn't get that. So I said, tell her it's Virginia and she's homesick and wants to talk to her folks. And it was Ella Fayon, and she said, oh, Virginia, there's a program at the school, and Barbara's in it. I know your mother's there, but I think your dad's home. I'll connect you to him. And, of course, the operators in Fredericksburg, Virginia, thought this was just hilarious. I could hear them laughing.
So the operator was here.
Do you know where the telephone operator's office was, or where the phone company?
Oh,
up
where-
above, you know where it was?
No.
Yeah,
I
up
don't.
over Seahusen's.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
the back
The
door,
brick building.
Oh, okay.
building, up those steps and up in there. And I wonder where all of the equipment, the phone,
I don't know, I wonder about that too.
I would love to be able to,
I wonder,
Find
I
out.
don't know where all that went.
I wonder too. I
Ed
wonder who
Hinkle
knows.
was the lineman.
Yes,
And he worked in the basement. I don't know where it was.
and the doctor's office was up there too at one time.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yes. Dr.
Okay.
Liddick was, the
Can you-
doctor was up there.
Imagine being 8.5 months pregnant and having to go up all
I
those
was just
steps.
thinking,
I
yeah,
know.
upstairs.
I
Oh.
Al Burnett has all of their phone operators' equipment in their
Yes, uh-huh.
museum, and it's
Yeah, they
really
have had to
neat.
carry all that upstairs.
Yeah,
Wow.
We have a lot of old pictures,
Oh,
but
yeah.
this is what is Seahusen's now. So the
Oh,
telephone office
okay.
is up here.
Okay.
And she
see,
has a
there's an
wonderful
apartment up there now.
picture of the telephone operators. But I don't know if it's in this book, but all these are Mechanicsville. Dick loves this one.
Yes, I think he mentioned, he was talking about this the other day, the big
Jake, who
corn
has
cob.
the rusty wrench.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And that would have been Freddie Ewell's ancestor, up
yes.
in the next block.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Freddie Ewell.
Yeah.
Would have been his ancestors
Yeah,
had
To
a
make a card out of that one.
Yes.
general store, I think
Yeah.
you'd call it.
Yeah,
Anyway,
but I don't know whether Bruce would have any, Seahusen would have any idea
church.
No,
where,
well, they should.
Oh, that's,
whether Steve, way back, whether Steve would have known and told him, or, I don't know. I wish we could find out though,
Find out just which.
where the phone company
Oh,
stuff.
I don't know. Let's see. You could ask the phone company what year they built the building back
Yeah.
across the alley.
Yeah,
we'll
And
find
they-
it.
and whether they maybe had
I
gotten a
have-
hold of any
I
of
would
it.
have that someplace, I think, Barb, when they built that building
Okay.
back there.
I don't know if it's in any of
I
our
don't
old books
remember.
or not. We'll check into that.
Yeah. But it was,
So some of the other buildings on Main Street,
well, I told you where the rusty wrench is, that had been the livery stable.
Yeah,
And is that where you learned how to roller skate? Is that
Yes,
the
I
livery
did.
stable? Okay.
Oh, that was a nice smooth cement floor, and I learned how to roller skate there. That was great. John and Lottie Lynch, her name was really Carlotta, she didn't like that. They didn't have any children of their own. And of course, that was in the middle of the block, and I lived down on the corner, so they were really nice to me. And so I learned to roller skate in there. It was a great place. So,
and then later it became the Pioneer Press.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
the Pioneer Press, across the street from the hotel, back by the alley, there's an awful looking old building that has like garage doors in the front. That's Cherry Street. The hotel was on the corner. Across from that, there's a yellow house. Back by the alley, there's an old building. Looked like maybe garage doors in the front. That's where the Pioneer Press was.
Okay.
And of course, I was just across the street from that. And I used to get to go over and watch them click along, and there'd end up with a little lead piece, really narrow and about so long, and it'd have the letters printed on it, and they'd all fit together in a box, and that would go in the frame to be printed. And I got to watch them do that.
Oh, I bet that was neat.
And then, but later on, it was up in that awful building there beside the Rusty Wrench. What does it say? Something about a tanning
suntan
parlor or
place,
something
yeah.
in there now. And it was up there for a while. Then there was a dental office in there too for a while, but that didn't last very long. But I can remember when the press office was up there, and they.
I worked in there for a while. I worked in the press office
Oh, you
when it was in
did?
there.
Okay.
Yeah. And Eileen Driscoll,
Uh-huh,
Ally, I worked with Ally.
okay. Pat Trump worked there for a
Did she?
while too.
Okay, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Hugh Doty.
Trying to call people to get news
Uh-huh.
and get ads.
Yep.
Richard, you can come and listen to tell me if I'm wrong.
He's
He's
not,
good at that.
he's not that old, Mom.
Yeah.
No, he's a youngster.
Oh.
He's good at starting
Um,
conversations though about that.
The
stuff.
furniture store was next,
Yeah.
and there is something in there, but they manage nursing homes.
The senior building, the senior apartments.
In nursing homes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right, right.
It was the furniture store, and the undertaker always had the furniture
Yeah.
store.
Yeah.
And,
I'm not sure why. I wonder why.
well, it gave him something to do when everybody was healthy.
Okay, that makes sense.
Horner's had the furniture store, and Bob Horner was in my class at school. And we were at his 13th birthday party when his dad, Paul, came in and said, well, I suppose you better come and hear the news. And President Roosevelt said, this is a day that will live in infamy. The Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor.
Oh, my
wow.
goodness.
But I was at Bob Horner's birthday party,
Oh,
December 7th.
Yep.
So,
that's a way to remember it.
Sure.
yeah, that's a day
yeah.
I will always remember.
Uh-huh.
I bet.
Then the drugstore was next, and for many years, Owen Byrne had the drugstore. He was a pharmacist. And he, like I said, they had a soda fountain. And they had stools that would, the top of the stool would turn around.
Mhm.
And of course, your refrigerators didn't have big freezers. So once in a while on a hot summer night, Dad would give me the money and I could go up and he'd hand pack. Oh, they had brown ice cream cartons, like so big around and about so tall, and he'd hand pack ice cream and I could take it back to the hotel and we could have ice cream. And that was a real treat.
Yeah.
Ordinarily, it was just a ice cream cone now and then.
Right. And
Was
where
he
was
the
that?
only pharmacist we had that you remember?
Hmm?
Was he the only pharmacist that we had?
Yeah, after he had a heart attack, they tried different things. There were some people came from Anamosa, and their family had a pharmacy, a drugstore and pharmacy in Anamosa, and you'd tell them what you needed, what drugs you need, and they'd bring it the next day when they
Okay.
came down. But you couldn't go in and get it today. Mhm. And then Jim and Margaret Glover, didn't
Yeah.
they run it for a
Well,
while?
Bloker had it before that.
Blokers,
Yeah.
and then Jim and
Yeah.
Margaret Glover.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And then Phil Sorensen.
Sorensen had it for a while. He was a
Yeah,
nice
and they
man.
bought Egerty's store.
Yep.
Bert Egerty was on the corner, and he was the town character. He never married. He lived to be an old man and never married. And he had a house that was torn down. Let's see, Jack Whirling and his wife live in one, and Sharon Pops lives in the other. Sharon Pops lives in the other one, and he had a house on those two lots. But he had never married, and he was quite a character. And I have a couple favorite stories about him. Their new undertaker had moved to town, and his wife wanted to make new curtains for their house. And she went up and she wanted to buy 4 yards of fabric to make kitchen curtains. And you know what a bolt of fabric is, like this.
Mhm.
And he got the one she picked, and he flipped the bolt over a couple of times and smoothed it out and started cutting. And she said, I wanted 4 yards. He said, I heard you. And she got home and I'm going to measure this. And she laid it out on the floor with a yardstick. She told her husband, if this isn't right, I'm going right back up there and let him know about it. And it was exactly right, within less than a quarter of an inch. And down here on the corner, across the street and on the corner, there's a newer house. McDowell's were the last, I don't know who lives there now. Kathy, well, when you come up the street from Casey's, Doyle Pickering had lived on the east side. This is the house on the west
Okay,
side,
yeah.
down here on the corner. And she went, Rosie Boots lived there. And she was a little overweight, not real fat, but a little overweight. And she went in to buy bloomers. And Bert Eggerty told her, "It's time you started wearing panties like all the other women in town. You don't need bloomers anymore." And Rosie went out of there. Oh, she was so indignant. She was just furious. But there was no place to buy bloomers anymore. Women really had quit wearing. They're the ones with elastic around the leg. Okay.
He had everything in that store. He had absolutely everything
Yes,
in that
he
store.
did. I can remember going there with grandmother for a really special occasion, and he'd grind coffee for us. He had a big
Oh, wow.
coffee grinder,
Oh,
and he had some groceries, but I was sick one time and in bed for a while with pneumonia, and somebody went up, mother or dad or somebody at the hotel went up and got me a bed jacket, a little yellow silky bed jacket to wear. But I couldn't believe he had it.
Yeah.
He just, like I said, he had fabric, he had food, he had everything.
Coffee grinder.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
When he sold out, that was a sale.
Yeah. Across the street where the memorial building is now, I barely remember there was a house there. And if you look back at a book on Mechanicsville, the businesses here a long time ago, there was a lawyer whose last name was Smith. And I wonder if they refer to the building as a house, but I wonder if he had his law office in the front and they lived in the back. I would have been maybe 12 years old, and Dad was a veterinarian, but he was on the board for the American Veterinary Medical Association, so we had to go to the meetings. Isn't that terrible? And one was in Washington, D.C., and mother had written back and forth to this Lottie Smith, and she came down and met us at the hotel, and they had dinner together one night and visited. And as soon as we got home, grandmother wanted to know about Lottie. And Dad said, well, she's obviously got a lot of money. She said she made her money importing fabrics and linens from other countries and selling them here. But it just didn't sound quite right to me. And Mother, who was the sweetest person in the world and never said anything bad about anybody, finally said, well, it did sound a little suspicious. But she owned that corner for years and finally sold it to build the memorial building. And they all thought she sold it at a very reasonable price. They were pleased with what she asked for the building. Then there was a barber shop. Am I allowed to tell this? I don't know.
If you decide no, we'll just edit it out.
Stub Reed had the barber shop, and he was the worst kind of alcoholic. And they lived in the house just across the alley from the hotel. I don't know who lives there now. And he would come home and he'd fight with Helen. And I try not to use naughty words, but I know them all, everyone. All I had to do was stand out in the backyard when Stubbered was drinking and you blankety blank blank blank, and he was talking to his wife.
Oh boy.
Oh, the things he called her, and the things she called him right back.
Well, good.
And they had two little children, and I am sure that this day and age there would be somebody come in and take the two children out of the house. They shouldn't have been there. then there was, on that side of the street, the next building would be the hardware store, and oh, I can't think right now the family that had it first, but John Cook worked there, and he took it over bought into it later on, but he also sold ice. And they had a pond down here where they could, if it froze during the winter, they could cut blocks of ice. And then he had a place where they put sawdust around them to keep them cold.
Oh,
And then he sold, I can remember when I was really little, Grandmother Page had a wooden refrigerator. As I remember, it was like so big, but in the top, you lifted the top off, and John Cook would bring, he had big clamps that he'd clamp into the ice, and he'd bring it in and put it in the top of that refrigerator. Once in a while, in the summer, they'd chip a little off that I could have. And you could chip it off for iced tea or
sure.
something. So, then there were the Stoffel brothers, and one of them had men's clothing, and the other side they had shoes. And I got a couple pair of shoes there. Mother said that, of course, Grandmother was busy serving meals and running the hotel, and Mother used to tell that it was Saturday, and the next day, Sunday, she was going to want to dress up because there was going to be a program at the church, and she was to be in it. So Grandmother said, well, go up to Stoffel's and buy yourself a new pair of shoes. The pair Mother wanted was a little tight, but she wanted it really bad, and Grandmother wasn't there to say no. So Mother got them, and she was so crippled she could hardly walk by the time she got to the church. Her feet hurt. So they did have some women's shoes. Later, Norval Eels. Norval or Paul. No, Paul was the son. Anyway, Eels had it. There were brothers, and they had it later. John and I put the two stores together and tried to open a restaurant there, but that didn't go at all. And then Betty, her husband tried to have a pharmacy there, made pills.
Oh,
Betty,
Where is this at?
like, it would be across from the Rusty Ranch.
Oh, okay.
Hazel Aarons worked there, and Reva
Yeah.
Boots worked there.
Yep.
And they made pills
Mm-hmm.
in there for a while.
Yeah, can't even
I
think.
can't remember
No.
his name. The restaurant, Kenneth Crumroy,
Kenny
Mr.
Deal.
Miss,
Kenny Deal had a,
yeah, Kenny Deal had it. Then the restaurant,
there's been 2 or 3 restaurants.
have I already told you about the restaurant that Crumroy's had?
I don't think so.
And of course, they were busy serving meals. They served breakfast in the morning, and they had son Kenny. And Mother would already have been in school for a couple years. And they couldn't get out to take Kenny to start school because they were busy serving meals. So they asked Mother if she would be responsible for getting Kenny back and forth to school until they felt he could do it by himself. And of course, he was a cute little boy, and Mother was glad to do it. Then, of course, Mother and Dad lived at the hotel for 12, 13 years after they were married, and Kenny took over running the restaurant across the street. So they'd always been back, not real close friends, but, it's a small town, Mechanicsville.
Sure.
And, well, actually, he married a friend of Mother's, Stoffel, Alberta Stoffel. Anyway, when I was still 12 or younger, we still lived at the hotel, and I slept on the back porch. And one night, it must have been midnight or later, I heard somebody at the door from the hall into what was the living room. And so I went in and got Mother and Dad up. And I can still see it. Mother had on a turquoise colored bathrobe. And she went to the door, and it was a patrolman with another man. And he said, I need a new room for this man. He just killed Kenneth Kermroy.
Oh my.
And I will always remember that.
Oh.
It was an accident down on Highway 30.
Oh. I wasn't expecting that turn.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Oh, it was terrible.
Oh.
Of course, Mother had always known him, and they'd not real close friends, but friends. And
Sure.
like I say, I still remember. I can still see it in my mind. So, but then there were a number of people had restaurants in there. Eleanor and Jerry McAfee. I think Colleen said she and Chuck had at one time.
Yeah, they did.
Oh, that's where the Northern Lights is?
Uh-huh,
Okay.
that one.
Then Wood's Hardware Store. That would have been Bill's uncle and aunt. Had Wood's Hardware Store.
Mhm.
Charlie Woods had a hardware store across the street. In that building, there's nothing in next to the Rusty Wrench. It says tanning parlor or something on the window. Anyway, F.L. Wilson, my father was F.M. Wilson, but F.L. Wilson had the hardware store. And their son Clement graduated from the Mechanicsville School and Coe College, and he went to the Olympics. He was a good runner and went to the Olympics. And down at Stanwood in the school building, they have a big trophy case, and it tells about him there. But Mechanicsville had a famous athlete. How about that?
Yeah.
It was Clement Wilson. And he used to come to see his parents, but he had a daughter, Margaret. And Margaret didn't come with him. And I can remember Grandmother Page said, oh, I'll bet Flora would have loved to see Margaret. I'm sure she's glad to see Clement, but wouldn't she have loved to see Margaret? Now I know what it is to see your daughters and grandchildren, so I can sympathize with that. But he went on to be a big success financially. Oh, I wish I could remember what he did, but I don't. But he lived at Bradenton, Florida, and did very well financially. Then Bro Cole's grocery store.
Yeah.
He also owned Lee's store, which is up where Tom Hall has.
Okay.
He owned both grocery stores.
Oh, okay.
And I can remember being given a nickel and sent over to get a loaf of colonial bread for a nickel. And but he had some chairs in the back, a whole bunch of chairs. And on Saturday night, the farmers would come to town, and a bunch of women would congregate in Bro Cole's grocery store while the men went up the next block to Scotty's.
And Scotty's was
A bar.
a bar. Okay.
Yep.
Yes. There were
Yeah.
pool tables in there.
Okay.
I wasn't allowed to go in, but I know about it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, way back when, there were Gimberlines had a bakery in one of those smaller buildings. But I really don't remember what was in there when I was little. But Differding's had a harness shop.
Yeah. Shoe shop, fix shoes. They fix shoes too.
Yeah.
I remember
But-
that.
Differding's had the harness shop. And when I was little, of course, farmers were still using horses until they got sleeping sickness here in horses in the
Oh.
1930s. A lot of farmers didn't want to give up their horses and spend the money to buy a tractor. So there was a lot of harness to be repaired, not just for people who wanted to ride, but for workhorses. There were a lot of, all farmers had a couple teams maybe, and so there was a lot of harness to be repaired. By the time I was little, well, there were still horses. I had one. But he put new soles and new heels on my shoes. I was hard on shoes. And rather than go to the store and buy a new pair, we got new soles and new heels put on our shoes and wore them a little longer.
Then the horses got sleeping sickness.
The horses in the 1930s got sleeping sickness, and so many farmers lost their horses and said, well, rather than buy a new team, we'll get a tractor. So, of course, that was kind of the end of his big business working with harness.
Right.
Oh, Otto Reimers had the barber shop. And they lived in the house that was torn down to put the addition on the Methodist church.
Okay.
And you knew John Sauer? Like he said, Mrs. Reimers wasn't the homeliest person in the world, but she was certainly in that top 10.
That sounds like
Oh, she
John.
was homely. Do you remember her?
No. But
Oh,
I remember
my.
John saying that.
But they lived in the house torn down to put the addition on the Methodist church. And she'd come up to get the mail every day and then take it over across the street to Otto in the barber shop. And grandmother had the hotel, and her brother, my Uncle Myron, who had never married and really wasn't quite as civilized as he could have been, but he didn't like Mrs. Reimers. So grandmother had, well, to the east in the lobby, there was a great big picture window. And grandmother had a long table there, and then she'd used bricks to build it up and made a long shelf. And she had all those African violets. There must have been, 20 or more African violets that she nursed along. But in the narrow north window, she had what I called a rat tail cactus, just little pieces. And every morning before Mrs. Reimers came uptown, he'd find a bloom on one of those African violets and stick it on the end of that cactus. And Mrs. Reimers would be so upset. That cactus bloomed all the time, and she had one like it, and it never ever bloomed. But, and then the bank, and I mentioned Jack Carville lived with us. Later, L.J. Paulson was there, and they had some trouble with the bank,
Yeah.
with the financing.
No.
Some
Embezzlement.
Yes.
some loans were made that the people didn't know they borrowed money.
Oh.
How about that? And Alberta Reed. Well, I guess it was in all the papers, I can tell it. Howard Carpenter and Eva farmed south of Highway 30 out there. I think their daughter just died within the last few years.
Just this one.
And Eva told Howard she was going to come in town and get a few groceries, and he said, well, I just sold, I don't know, corn or hogs or something. Stop in the bank and pay off that note. So Eva went in, and it just happened. LJ and Elvira had gone to Texas or Arizona or someplace on vacation. And Eva went in, and Marilyn Scow came up to wait on her. And Eva said, I want to pay off that note. And Marilyn went back, and she came back and said, well, which one do you want? And they called Howard to come right in, and they only should have had one note, and there were two. And Alberta Reed worked there at the time, and she went through all the loans, and they said she picked out all but 2 or 3 of them that were false. And he ended up in a enclosed fence place up in Minnesota.
He was a nice guy.
But, true story, I had already told my parents he was a crook.
I did. Yes, you did.
Because I had gone in with my little dime book or whatever to make a deposit. And, they added the amount to my book, and I said I wanted to see my money.
Mm.
And Mr. Paulson took me into the vault, and he said, here's everybody's money. I said, what's my money? and he said, well, you know, we don't have your money. And I came back and
Yes,
told
you
my
did.
parents, he's a crook.
She
He
was
stole
just,
my money.
He
she
couldn't-
was
he
really
couldn't show
little
you.
at the
No.
time.
He couldn't show you your
He
money.
showed me my money.
She
Yeah.
was really little at the time.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
But he was a nice guy. He was just a nice guy, but he was a
So-
crook.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
they had to sell the boys' sax, they had 2 boys, they had
Yeah.
to sell the boys' saxophone, and we bought it. And
Ah.
then Marlee was pretty good at music, and that saxophone wasn't good enough for her, so we bought Duane Eilers.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Mechanicsville used to be 2 towns. Did you guys know that?
Your boy in Mechanicsville. Uh-huh. Across on the corner, when I was little, it was Greenwald's grocery store. And Jack Carville, I mentioned him, the cashier at the bank, and he said he got up about 3 o'clock in the morning, and he never got up during the night. But that night he happened to get up, and he looked out, and he could see, well, Roy Greenwald in there walking, of course, the big windows for the store, and he could see Roy Greenwald walking back and forth in there, and pretty soon it started to see some flames coming up. So Jack put on his bedroom slippers, and to ring the fire bell, you had to run, it had been 2 blocks up the street, and pull the rope on the side of the fire station. And so, of course, the firemen, it wasn't long, it was only 2 blocks down the street, and they got the fire put out. And I don't think he was ever charged, but Jack swore that Roy Greenwald started that fire himself. And then back of the fire station, or of the grocery store, there's a purple door in there where they've painted all that. When my father first came to town, that was his veterinary office. When the bank up where Seehusens are now, that bank closed during the Great Depression, and they had to sell the building within 6 months. And Dad bought it because he got rent from the telephone office and the doctor's office, an apartment upstairs, plus Harry Gibbo was in the back. So it was a good buy for him. Anyway, he had his office back there. And then Val DeWald on in the back, and I think that John Sandberg has torn off the building there on the very back.
Part of it, yeah. He still has some stuff in the back
Okay.
of Schroeder's.
But I just remember him selling chicken feed. Mother didn't like him because his wife Ruby was a friend of Mother's, and she was dying of breast cancer, and he already had a new girlfriend picked out, so Mother didn't like him.
Fair enough.
Got that?
I thought so.
Fair enough.
But he was there. Oh, and then on the street, there are doors back there. You go in a little step and a door or 2 back there. Isn't there an apartment there?
Yep.
On the east side of that building. Mr. Garlick had a jewelry store back there. And he never
didn't
married.
know.
He always had a room there at the hotel. It was just a small room. But he lived there for years, and that's where Mother got her watch, and Mary Lee has her watch, I think. But he repaired watches. You couldn't sell enough jewelry in Mechanicsville, but he repaired watches. And never married. He was a little short man, wore the same suit day after day after day. But he
Now-
made enough to pay his room rent and his food and by repairing watches. So I don't think he sold much in the way of watches and jewelry, but he might have.
That's a lost art.
Yeah.
Repairing watches and
Oh,
clocks.
yes.
Yes,
Boy, you can't find anybody to fix a clock.
yeah, and back then, men had pocket watches, and
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
so he repaired a lot of watches.
Wow. Now, Dick had told us that your father, when they had the pork, the pig flu or pig something.
The cow.
Uh,
War?
No, it was when
Pork Center days.
Well, when all the pigs died.
yeah, when all the
Oh.
pigs around state got sick and died,
The
that your
the
dad and
horses died of. You had to give them 2 shots. You'd go one day and give them a shot, and then you'd go back 2 days later and give them a second shot. But a lot of horses died,
Right.
a lot of them, and that's what a lot of farmers went to tractors.